really astute thing to do, this Jesus campaign. It's really amazing. Now, he crashed and burned as a candidate subsequently, only because he was such a terrible candidate, his debate performance and whatnot. But the reality is, that this is where America has come. We assume progress, but sometimes time passes, and it ain't progress, it's actually regression. It steps backwards. We need to face this reality. This is the reality of America today. You could say, why is the religious right so successful? It's a great question, I think. It certainly is not the power of their ideas, right? I mean, that you usually think, oh, there's a successful social movement, must have great ideas behind it. Well, biblical literalism, creationism, these are ideas, as I point out in the book, these were out of vogue 100 years ago. Never mind the presidential election of 2012. Wind the clock back to the presidential election of 1912. There are 4 relevant candidates for president in that election. Woodrow Wilson is probably the most religious of the 4, and he also won the election. Interesting, if you look at all 4 candidates, all of them were visibly more religiously skeptical than most candidates would dare to be today. Woodrow Wilson is quoted a few years after the election. He's asked about evolution. What do you think of evolution, Woodrow? And he says, well, the theory of evolution? Of course I accept it. At this late date, who wouldn't? Can you imagine? This is really, it really drives home the point, doesn't it? That this country is not where it should be in the second decade of the 21st century. So. Anyway, so we need to take a look at the opposition to the religious right. Who are they? Where do they come from? Well, historically, if you look at it, it goes something like this. The opposition to the religious right has basically come from 2 sectors over the last 30 or so years. It's come from liberal and moderate politicians who are just the natural opponents of the religious right? People like Ted Kennedy, Bill Clinton, they're just on the other side of the aisle, and they're the natural opponents of the religious right. And then it's also come from advocacy groups. Excellent groups, groups like People for the American Way, the ACLU, Americans United for Separation of Church and State. I'm sure I support all those groups, and I'm sure many people in this room do too. All excellent. One thing you really find, though, if you look at all this opposition to the religious right, there's actually a couple things you find. They are not out for the purpose of impeaching the religious foundation of the religious right, okay? In other words, they're not out there saying, you guys are based on religion, and it's all just, it's all just, you got it wrong. The foundation of what you're standing up for politically just has no validity. That's not what that opposition does. And more importantly, perhaps, the politicians and the advocacy groups are not out for the purpose of validating the secular demographic as a respectable portion of the American tapestry. It's just not what they exist for. And I'm not criticizing them for it either. It's just not their purpose in the world. They're not out there to validate seculars as, these are good people who are as good as religious people. Not their purpose. And you can see how it operates in real life. Shortly after the 1980 election, Ted Kennedy, being an astute politician, decided to go down to Lynchburg, Virginia, and give a speech at Jerry Falwell's college. He saw what they had done in the 1980 election, and he said, wow, I'm going to go, mingle with these people and check out what they're all about. So he gives a speech on religion and politics. Ted Kennedy in Lynchburg. I would have loved to have been there. But anyway, he gets up and he says, I'm an American and I'm a Catholic. I love my country and I treasure my faith. Okay, so, as a secular American, I can only say, thanks, Ted. Thank you. We're glad you, treasure your faith. But, great. And I suppose that's true. He's Catholic, he's American, that's what he says. That's fine, but think about what he's really saying. Okay? What he's saying is that those folks on the religious right don't own religion. We liberals can be religious too, right? Okay, that's the message Ted is sending. That's the opposition to the religious right. We can be religious too, okay, consistently. Bill Clinton did the same thing, of course. He was quite religious, visibly so. And a sinner as well, as Jerry gladly. But anyway, and look at the advocacy groups. It's really the same thing. They try very, very hard to associate with religion as much as they can, and I'm not criticizing them for it. It's probably, you know, from a business standpoint, probably a wise thing to do. But they always will put religious people on their boards and advertise the fact that they do it at any opportunity, okay? I mean, Americans United has been led by the Reverend Barry Lynn for a couple decades now. He's a great guy and a very effective advocate. But, you know, again, what do we got? We got rabbis and ministers on the board, and, you know, look at them. See, we're religious too. That's really what's happening. And we need to realize what happens as a result of that, right? What happens is we've got a spectrum of acceptable opinion in American public dialogue now that runs from the religious right to the religious left. And if you ain't on that spectrum, you know, you're presumably kind of a fringe player. We can dismiss you as insignificant. You certainly are not running for public office. You know, you can stick around because we're a free country, but, you know, you're an outsider. You know, that you're not part of the mainstream of American public dialogue and public policy making. You know, this allows for paradigms to happen. You know, the paradigm that America is a very religious country. Am I so sick of hearing that? You know, you want a very religious country? You go to Somalia, you go to Saudi Arabia, there's a very religious country, right? America is a somewhat religious country, somewhat more religious than most other Western developed countries. I'll give you that. But the reality is that there is great appreciation for religious skepticism, irreverence, and secularity in American culture. It's all over the place. Anywhere outside the realm of politics. You look at pop culture, the arts, film. I mean, look at the popularity of George Carlin and Bill Maher. These are not fringe characters. Everyone appreciates them. We all laugh. Religious, you know, whatever. There's an appreciation of poking fun at organized religion because it's such an easy target, right? I mean, it's just, and we can appreciate the hypocrisy of religion. We can talk about it. The epic status of the Monty Python movies, right? Everyone loves those. There's, in the secular tradition in America, you know, going all the way back from Jefferson forward, you go, you know, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Robert Ingersoll, Clarence Darrow, Mark Twain. There's just so much. And not everyone is an open atheist, but there's skepticism, there's secularity, there's an appreciation of a non-religious worldview. It's all over the place in America. This is a consciousness-raising movement. We don't, you know, we just have to wake people up that for some reason in the realm of politics, there is this fence of piety around the area that does not exist in the rest of America. What's going on? You know, we can wake people up to this. This is exactly what's going on. So anyway, it's you know, something to think about, and it's certainly something you realize when you look at this, is that the religious right has succeeded by, not by winning debates with us, but by successfully keeping us out of the debate, by successfully creating a social and political scene where we are kind of seen as outsiders, where we assumed to be fringe characters. You know, we're a huge demographic. We really, think about what a huge demographic we are. You know, at least, what, 10, 15, 20% of the population, depending on how you can even argue greater than that, you know, depending on whether you're talking about, you know, strict atheists or just people who are kind of apathetic and non-religious. But we're a huge demographic, bigger than almost any religious category. Yet we have been skillfully bumped off the table in the American discussion, and that's really what's going to change. And you can probably see where I'm going with this. What we need to do, the new opposition to the religious right, if you will, as opposed to the failed historical traditional opposition, is us. It's the modern secular movement, which is really only a few years old, certainly less than a decade old. It has not existed. I know organized secular and humanist groups have existed longer than that, but they haven't been doing what the modern movement has started to do, and they are just a completely different animal. And I'll talk about it a little bit in just a little bit. But the modern secular movement is an identity-oriented movement, okay? It emphasizes secular identity, and people say, well, which secular identity? Should we be atheist? Should we be humanist? And I don't want to go there, okay? There's about a dozen different secular identities. You pick whichever one or two or three you feel comfortable with and run with it. We don't have time to be debating over whether we should all be humanists, whether we should all be atheists. Someone in this crowd taught me the identity post-theological. I kind of like that. A free thinker, whatever. Let's onward, forward, right? This is a movement, and we're not gonna wake up someday and find out that, oh, the humanists won the debate. All seculars are going to identify as human. It ain't going to happen. So let's just go onward. But it's an identity-oriented movement that is about coming out and letting your friends and neighbors know you're there. It's very analogous to the successful LGBT movement, okay, the gay rights movement. And I said earlier that there's one area, only one major area that I can think of, that the religious right has truly failed. And that's it, the LGBT movement. We need to learn, what did they do right? Because it's truly remarkable. I mean, it's remarkable anyway, but it's even more remarkable that the LGBT movement did what it did in an environment where the religious right was getting increasingly powerful. I mean, it's to think about that. The religious right has been on the ascendance for 30 years, yet the LGBT movement, miraculously, if you like religious right, they have been, and nobody would have dreamed 30 years ago that gays and lesbians would be able to get married in many parts of America. That is phenomenal. And so how did they do it? Well, they did it through identity-oriented activism, by simply appealing to basic fairness, that it's not right to hate people. It's not right to be prejudiced against people. It's just a matter of consciousness raising, as I said. It's very easy to hate gays and lesbians when everyone around you seems to be talking down about them and you don't think you know any. So yeah, you just get conditioned as a child, right? Yep, homosexuality, bad. But when you begin to realize that you actually know gays and lesbians, well, oh gee, cousin Jimmy, he's gay, gee. I always thought he was a pretty nice guy, maybe gays aren't so bad. It's a matter of just, coming out of the closet, letting people know that you're there. And I realize some people, for career reasons and family reasons, can't come out as easily or as widespread as others. I can respect that, and I'm certainly not going to stand here and dictate, well, you should come out. No, but to the extent you can, you need to be out there. You need to be out there as a secular American, as an atheist, as an agnostic, even if you don't like the atheist label. I'm not going to force it on you. Who am I? But identify as a not very religious. That's pretty good. Or just a humanist. Just is any way that you can. Because it really does change people's minds. It's very easy for many Americans to hate seculars nowadays because they don't think they know any. It's just like the gay lesbian situation 30 years ago. But when you start realizing that, gee, that kid you've been playing with, for the last 10 years, his family is atheist, well, it's a lot harder to hate. And the nice thing about our movement is it usually doesn't involve getting arrested or sticking it to the man. It's really just a matter of coming out. It's not the hardest thing in the world to do. There's a level of discomfort there. But it's not the kind of activism that really requires you to sacrifice all that greatly. So anyway, there's an awful lot going on in the movement, and people do ask me, well, where are the signs of a real movement happening? You say this movement's only been around for a few years. Show me some results. Well, I think there's several things we can point to that just indicate the difference, night and day, between just a few years ago and today. And I certainly can't hit on all of them, but I just want to mention a few of them. One of the most hopeful signs we have in this movement is the Secular Student Alliance, and I'm sure many of the people in this room are familiar with the SSA. Just 5 years ago, the Secular Student Alliance, which the SSA is the national umbrella group, in case you don't know. If you want to start a campus atheist or humanist group, Ohio State or wherever, you start your club and you probably then associate with the SSA. And it's, so the SSA 5 years ago had about 36 affiliates across the country. I mean, not a whole lot. Here we are just 5 years later. The Secular Student Alliance has over 350 affiliates, wow. And they can hardly keep up with demand. There's just so much demand. And I think we need to stop for a moment and think about this whole phenomenon of secular students, because it speaks, it has a lot of information in there. For one thing, I don't think atheists and humanists on college campuses are really something new. I went to college back in the 80s, and I know there were plenty of atheists and humanists around my college campus. And I think for the most part, unless you went to a very religious school, it's probably the case for you too. What's different though, I believe, from circulating quite a bit in secular student land, is that today's secular students really see the value and importance of secular identity, which is what this movement is all about, okay? Back in my day, if you happened to be an atheist or agnostic, it was really incidental. It was no big deal. I mean, you really wouldn't even talk about it. You might, if you played identity politics, you might identify, as gay, lesbian, you might liberal or conservative, socialist, libertarian, maybe feminist. That there are a lot of identities you could wear on your sleeve if you were into identity politics, but you would never even think of identity, as a primary identity, standing up in the world, I'm an atheist. Today it's different though, and it's because of the climate, it's because of the environment and the landscape in America. It's gone off the cliff, as I mentioned earlier. The religious right is just it permeates everything. If you are appalled by what the religious right is doing to this country, with the education, the environment, there's all the anti-intellectualism, these culture wars, if you're appalled by all that, what easier, more efficient way of standing up than just saying, I'm an atheist. Oh, okay. We see where she stands, right? It's a secular identity is important to younger people now because it's a way of really standing up in the world and very easily saying what you're all about. It's important now, unlike 30 years ago. And a lot of these secular students as well, they don't have this hang-up over the word atheism that a lot of older people. Seculars I found are pretty similar, young and old, but there's a couple things that are different. And one thing is with younger seculars, they are not freaked out by the word atheist. You talk to older people, you should really identify, you don't believe in God, why don't you identify as an atheist? They say, well, I can't identify as an atheist. That's not right. You can't do that. They'll associate communism, atheism, that whole call. I talked to a secular student about that a couple months ago at the SSA conference, this communist atheist thing. She says, oh, that's so 20th century. Isn't that great? That's exactly what we want. They need to remove that stigma. Even if you don't want to identify as an atheist, for whatever reason, at least realize the importance. This movement can't call itself successful as long as the atheist identity is stigmatized, okay? We can't have that. We have to get over it. It's just an important thing. Now, the SSA is also, more reason for hope, they're moving into high schools, okay? I talk about the need to normalize secularity, right? Well, what is going to normalize it more than having an SSA chapter in your local high school, These kids who previously grew up thinking there were no atheists in town, atheists work for the devil, they're all bad people, now all of a sudden you're walking by and there's an atheist club meeting in the cafeteria, and that kid who's been on your Little League team for the last 5 years is sitting down with them. He doesn't seem like he works for the devil. And that's what's happening. It's just a great phenomenon. It's something we should all be glad to see. So there's that. And then there's surveys going on that show that the movement is really getting traction and making a difference. For the first time ever this summer, a survey came out showing that a majority of Americans would vote for an otherwise qualified atheist presidential candidate. That's great progress. First time we ever cracked the 50% barriers, 54%. Not high enough, surely. We need better numbers than that, but it's the first survey done back in the 50s, the number was 18%. So we've tripled. And, and among younger people, the poll defines under 30. I define it differently, but under 30s, 70% would vote for an otherwise qualified atheist. So it shows the direction we're going, right? The trend is only in our direction. It's all good, all positive. Social media and the internet have completely changed the landscape. Probably, I think a lot of groups can say they've benefited from the internet and social media. I think it would be hard to find a group that has benefited more than the secular demographic. What the internet and social media offer so perfectly complements exactly what our movement needed. If you were an atheist down in Columbia, South Carolina 10 years ago, you probably thought you were the only one for 20 miles in any direction. You shut up about it, you go on with your business, just lay low, and that was how you would think. Today, there's all sorts of blogs. I mean, there's the Friendly Atheist, there's PZ's blog, there's just information, quantities of information out there, and there's meetup groups. You're in Columbia, South Carolina, you go on to meetup, you find out that there's a group of atheists meeting around the corner to drink skeptically next week. And then they're going to have a lecture the week after that. There's community and camaraderie. There's all this going on, just activity that just did not exist 10 years ago. It's all really, really good. In fact, you can really see how the internet has affected things by taking a look at two church-state cases that are separated by about 50 years. The 1948 case of McCollum was the case that got religious instruction removed from public school. 1948, the McCollum, an atheist family from Champaign, Illinois, they object to religious instruction. They are instantly ostracized, subjected to all sorts of community hostility. The parents almost lose their job. And by the way, this is all pretty typical for atheists who bring church-state cases openly. You expect to be ostracized and bullied. The child involved was so bullied that he had to leave town and finish high school out of state with his grandparents in New York. It was just absolutely horrific, something you would never wish on anyone. Well, fast forward 50 years to last year, Jessica Alquist in Cranston, Rhode Island, right? This church-state case was a little different. It didn't go to the Supreme Court at all. It was only local in the federal court in Rhode Island. But she objects to a prayer banner hanging in her high school in Cranston. And it's got a blatant prayer on it to our Heavenly Father. It's an obvious church-state violation. Once she pointed out the administration should have thanked her and taken it down. But of course, that's not what happened. Instead, the entire community blew up around her. She had no friends anywhere. Ostracized, bullied, all the same stuff as McCollum's. Her state legislator called her an evil little thing. Isn't that nice, for an elected official? The kids in her class, when they said the Pledge of Allegiance at the under God part, they turned away from the flag and looked at her and yelled, "Under God," to remind her that this nation is under God, that she's not, a real American. This is the treatment you get if you bring a church-state case. Well, but there was something different, okay? Separated by 60 years or so. Jessica Alquist had the internet, okay, unlike the McCollums. The McCollum kid was humiliated and run out of town, and it took him many years to really recover from the experience. Jessica Alquist, alone in her community, went online and she set up a Facebook page called Supporters of Removal of the Cranston Prayer Banner. Within days, she had thousands of members to that group. And, think about that, how empowering that is. If there's thousands of people coming out of the woodwork to say, you know what, it's not you, Jessica, it's them, okay? They're crazy, not you. And instead of being humiliated and run out of town, she's stronger than she ever was. She's out public speaking now, setting up clubs, atheist clubs in schools all over the country, and it's just a completely different experience. It's called camaraderie, solidarity, and it really shows a movement, okay? It's a real movement. You can talk about social trends come and go, this is hot this year, this is hot next, but this movement is not going away. There's a large community of people out there who realize that they've been on the outside looking in too long. The motto of the feminist movement, one of the mottos, and I loved it, is feminism is the radical idea that women are people too. I'm sure you've heard that. Well, I think one motto of our movement can be, the secular movement is the radical idea that non-believers are Americans too.
Yeah.
It should not be a radical idea. It's, this is identity politics, and it's something that really did not exist even 5 or 6 years ago, when most secular and humanist groups were laying low on identity, and if you were involved in political activism, it would be on, reproductive rights, joining with Planned Parenthood to make sure, and that's great. The humanist groups, the AHA, still does all that, but, we've lifted our head up as far as identity goes, and, that there's some issues of dignity here. There's some issues of respect here. We're tired of getting marginalized, that sort of thing. And it's all good. It's all good. The AHA is a completely different organization than it was 10 years ago, too. It's completely different. If you remember 10 years ago, you were one of about 5,000, which is good. You're a member of a great club. You would hear from the organization about every 2 months or so. You would get our magazine. And you'd be updated with a few interesting articles about issues of interest to humanists, and then you'd get an occasional newsletter, maybe an occasional mailing besides that, but that was it. Every couple of months you'd hear from us. Today, we're not 5,000, we've got over 80,000 followers on Facebook. 80,000! And these people don't hear from us just every couple of months, with an interesting article. So they have a constant flow of information on Facebook. If you're not a friend of ours on Facebook, please join, get on the bandwagon. But there's a steady flow of information. Numerous articles every day. It can just be an article of interest about church-state separation or the treatment of non-theists somewhere, even international. It can be an opinion piece or sometimes just a piece of humor or something like that, a cartoon, but just information flow. If something happens in the world and it's really relevant to seculars, you will know about it. You'll know about it in a matter of minutes because we'll be there. And the information flows both ways as well. People let us know what they think. Believe it or not, humanists have opinions, and they let us know when they like things, when they don't, especially when they don't like things. But it's great. It's the atmosphere of a movement, though. I like to use the comparison of a club to a movement, and I really do think 10 years ago, this sector was more of a club. But today it's much more of a movement, and that's all good. We've got things like the Secular Coalition for America now, actually lobbying in the name of atheists, agnostics, and humanists in Washington. That's, again, identity politics. We're here. We would like our place at the table. We'd like you to listen to us. Issuing action alerts and sending mass mailings to congressmen. We've got the software now where you put in your zip code and we will draft a letter to your congressperson on an issue so that they are getting multiple mailings about something of importance to our community. This is all activism that just didn't even exist a few years ago. And there's no way it's going away. This movement is standing up. And the goal, I like to say, is to return the religious right to pre-Reagan levels of potency. You know what I mean? I think what we want, certainly we're not really trying to convert religious people to secularity. I mean, that would be nice, but that's not what the movement's about. We know this is a pluralistic country with lots of different views. With there will always be religious conservatives in America, and that helps create, an interesting fabric. But we're not going to stand for religious predomination anymore. Okay, we are as much Americans as anyone else, and we just need to stand up and do it. So I think we're well on our way. It's people ask me, you're a humanist? Are you a religious humanist or a secular humanist? I say I am a movement humanist. That's what that's what we really need is a movement. And I hope you agree. I hope that, do I get a Darwin? Darwin! See the light. That's good. All right. Well, thank you. And